The restaurant buzzed with the usual evening crowd, the clinking of cutlery and low murmur of conversation creating a cozy yet bustling atmosphere. At the far corner, in a booth everyone instinctively avoided, sat Viktor Romano, the infamous Mafia boss whose reputation had cast a shadow over the entire city. His presence alone silenced waiters and patrons alike. Servers would cross to the other side of the room rather than pass near him, their hands trembling as they clutched menus. Whispers floated through the air, names, rumors, stories of his ruthlessness, but one waitress, Lina, moved with calm confidence through the maze of tables. She didn't flinch when her eyes met Viktor's. She approached with a polite smile, her notebook in hand, asking, "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" Viktor's sharp gaze studied her, almost as if measuring her courage. Unlike the others, she didn't avert her eyes or tremble. Instead, she treated him like any other customer, her voice steady, her manner professional yet warm. Something about her caught Viktor off guard. There was a spark of intrigue in his otherwise cold demeanor. He leaned back, observing her movements, noting the lack of fear in her posture. Other staff watched from a distance, astonished at her bravery. As she jotted down his order, a subtle tension filled the air, charged with curiosity and unspoken questions. In that moment, an unassuming waitress became the only person in the room who didn't shrink from the legend, and Viktor found himself quietly fascinated by her fearlessness. The following evening, the restaurant hummed with the usual dinner crowd, but all eyes seemed drawn to Viktor Romano's table. Lina moved between the tables with practiced grace, balancing plates and drinks, but her attention kept drifting toward him. Viktor sat alone, an imposing figure in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable, fingers drumming lightly on the polished table. Tonight, he didn't just glance at her. He watched her every move, curious how this young waitress managed to carry herself with such confidence in a room full of fear. When she approached, he offered a small, almost imperceptible smirk, as though testing her composure. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly, voice low but carrying an edge of amusement. Lina met his gaze steadily, replying with a polite, measured tone. "I treat every customer the same, sir." Viktor leaned back, clearly intrigued by her honesty and boldness. The other staff exchanged nervous glances, whispering to one another, but Lina continued her work unfazed, placing his order with precision. As the night progressed, Viktor requested subtle changes to his dishes, noting the smallest details, and Lina adjusted without hesitation, demonstrating both attentiveness and sharp instincts. For the first time, Viktor felt the thrill of someone who could match his exacting standards without flinching. By the end of the meal, he realized this waitress was unlike anyone he had ever met, unafraid, intelligent, and quietly defiant. As she walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts, Viktor felt an unfamiliar pull of curiosity, the beginnings of fascination stirring within him, knowing he had to see more of her. The next evening, the atmosphere in the restaurant was tense, though most of the staff tried to act as if nothing was unusual. Viktor Romano had returned, his presence commanding the room without uttering a word. Lina moved with her usual poise, weaving between tables, but her mind couldn't stop returning to him. As she approached his booth, Viktor's sharp gaze followed her every step, studying the way she carried herself, the confidence in her movements. "You keep coming back," he said, his voice low, almost a challenge. Lina smiled politely, setting down his order. "And you keep ordering," she replied, her tone steady, unwavering. There was a moment of silence, charged with unspoken tension. Other waiters avoided eye contact, clearly uneasy, but Lina held hers, refusing to show even the slightest trace of fear. Viktor leaned forward slightly, intrigued by her composure, and began asking her questions. Not about the menu, but about her life, her thoughts, and her perspective. Lina answered carefully, offering just enough to satisfy his curiosity without revealing too much. Slowly, a subtle connection began to form, built on mutual respect and an unspoken understanding. For the first time, Viktor felt that he was not just a feared figure in a restaurant, but a man being seen, challenged even, by someone small yet unyielding. By the time Lina walked away, Viktor's mind was racing. He realized this waitress was not only brave, but she was different, someone who could see through the walls he had built, someone who might change the rules of his carefully controlled world forever. The following week, tension in the restaurant had reached a quiet but palpable peak. Viktor Romano had become a regular, and though no one admitted it aloud, everyone tiptoed around his table, careful not to draw his attention. Lina, however, continued her work as if nothing had changed, moving with calm efficiency, taking orders, serving dishes, and clearing tables. Tonight, though, the air felt different. Viktor's gaze followed her from the moment she stepped onto the floor, a mix of curiosity and amusement in his dark eyes. As she approached his booth, he leaned back, observing her every move. "You don't seem fazed by any of this," he said, gesturing subtly at the restaurant staff who had frozen in their tasks. Lina smiled politely, setting down his drink. "I focus on my job, sir," she replied simply. Viktor studied her, intrigued by her unwavering composure. Then, unexpectedly, he asked her to join him in the private lounge, a request that made her heart race. She hesitated only briefly before following, aware of the whispers and uneasy stares from the staff. Inside, the lounge was dimly lit, shadows casting a dramatic glow across Viktor's sharp features. He studied her silently for a moment before speaking again, his tone softer but edged with intensity. "You're not like the others," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lina met his gaze evenly. In that moment, a bridge had been built between them, one forged not by fear or power, but by a mutual recognition of courage, intelligence, and the spark of something neither had expected. The tension in the city seemed to follow Viktor Romano wherever he went, and tonight was no different. Lina moved through the restaurant with her usual grace, but her nerves were heightened. Viktor had requested she stay late after closing, a rare privilege, and an unusual risk. As the last patrons left and the lights dimmed, Viktor appeared at his usual table, his presence filling the room like a shadow. Lina approached cautiously but without hesitation, balancing a tray of drinks. "You stayed late," Viktor observed, his tone measured, almost teasing. "Some things require attention," she replied, her voice steady despite the thrum of adrenaline in her chest. He leaned back, studying her closely, his sharp eyes noting the subtle ways she kept her composure even under his scrutiny. Tonight there was no small talk. Viktor had a proposition, one that blurred the line between customer and confidant. He explained that a threat had emerged within his operations, a rival faction testing boundaries, and he needed someone he could trust to observe and report without fear. Lina listened intently, her mind racing, weighing the danger against the pull of curiosity and courage she had always felt toward him. As he outlined the situation, it became clear she was being offered a role far beyond that of a waitress. The room seemed to shrink around them, the usual clatter and chatter of the restaurant fading into silence. When he finished, he met her gaze directly, as if challenging her to make a choice. Lina knew that accepting would change her life forever, and yet she felt a thrill she couldn't resist. The next evening, the restaurant had emptied earlier than usual, leaving an almost eerie stillness that seemed to mirror the tension building between Lina and Viktor Romano. Lina moved with her usual confidence, clearing tables and arranging silverware, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the previous night. Viktor had called her after closing, and now, as she approached his table, the weight of his gaze made her pulse quicken. He sat in the same booth, the dim light highlighting the sharp lines of his face, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that was both intimidating and magnetic. "You've been thinking about last night," he stated rather than asked, his voice low and deliberate. Lina met his gaze evenly, taking a slow breath before replying. "I was trying to understand why you need me here, sir." Viktor leaned back, a faint smirk playing on his lips, and for the first time, he allowed a glimpse of vulnerability to show. "Because I need someone who sees me, not just the power or the fear, but me," he admitted, the honesty startling in its rarity. Lina felt a shift, a subtle understanding that went beyond words. As they spoke, the room seemed to close in on them, the usual hierarchy of boss and waitress dissolving into something far more personal and dangerous. By the end of the evening, it was clear that nothing in Lina's life, or Viktor's, would ever be the same. She had stepped into his world, not as a servant, but as an equal, and the course of both their lives had changed irrevocably.